Picture a machine built with the single purpose of shaving milliseconds off a lap time, a razor-edged creation where every bolt, angle, and vibration serves speed before comfort, silence, or compromise. Imagine the kind of precision that makes minor adjustments feel like make-or-break decisions, and the kind of focus that turns a straightaway into a proving ground rather than a place to rest your grip. Long before the average rider ever sees it up close, a project like this lives in wind tunnels, on data sheets, and in the imaginations of people who think in rev ranges and corner speeds instead of budgets and broad appeal. It comes from the belief that domination isn't given. It's engineered through stubbornness, sleepless nights, and the willingness to gamble everything on an idea that the masses might never fully understand. What happens when that gamble pays off and refuses to fade quietly into history is a story worth telling until the engine goes cold. Like and subscribe and drop a comment on what you want to see covered next. The Aprilia RSV4 did not emerge from a blank slate or a casual brainstorm. It came from a moment when its manufacturer realized that staying relevant in top-tier competition meant building something far more focused than a road-biased sport bike with racing aspirations. The Aprilia RSV4 began as a high-stakes response to a racing landscape dominated by established players with deeper budgets and broader dealer networks. Yet the goal was never to build a crowd-pleaser. It was to build a scalpel for championships. Development started with the engine layout, because Aprilia believed a narrow-angle V4 could deliver the compact dimensions of a V-twin and the high-revving punch of an inline-4. That choice alone shaped nearly every other design decision. Engineers obsessed over weight distribution, airflow management, and chassis stiffness, making the RSV4 feel like a prototype racer wearing just enough clothes to be street legal. Frames were tested and revised with track telemetry, guiding everything from weld thickness to swing arm pivot placement. Riders who tested the earliest development mules described a sensation of sitting inside the machine rather than on top of it, and that impression wasn't accidental. Every component was arranged to centralize mass, limit flex where it mattered, and leave as little wasted space as possible. Unlike sport bikes designed to woo everyday commuters or first-time superbike owners, the RSV4's form followed its function so tightly that comfort, noise control, and operating smoothness were secondary concerns. Even the bodywork served airflow, cooling demands, and rider tuck more than aesthetics. Early internal debates centered on whether the electronics should act as silent guardians or active coaching systems. But the team settled on configurable aids that let experienced riders lean into aggression without fearing sudden loss of traction. Ride-by-wire, multi-level traction control, and adjustable engine mapping appeared before many rivals had moved beyond basic fuel injection tweaks. Testing happened on circuits where lap times were recorded like financial statements, and mechanics treated each track session as a full-scale audit of steering response, throttle connection, and braking stability. The Aprilia RSV4 reached production with barely diluted race DNA, and early adopters found themselves riding something that demanded respect rather than asking politely for approval. The clutch engagement, engine heat, and aggressive ergonomics made it clear this was not an everyday commuter. Owners willing to live with those compromises discovered a bike that rewarded commitment with unmatched corner speed, front-end feel, and stability at lean angles that would make less focused machines flinch. Behind the scenes, the people who approved the RSV4 signed off with the understanding that profits would come second to prestige. Success on the track would serve as marketing for the showroom, not the other way around. The culture around its creation reflected a small company's stubbornness that prized innovation through iteration rather than building safe, middle-of-the-road options. Over time, small refinements to the suspension, electronics suite, and aerodynamics proved the platform had room to grow without abandoning its hardcore mission. Each model year was treated as a new lap rather than a fresh start. Meanwhile, owners in the US who sought one often had to work through limited availability and higher maintenance costs, a reality that underscored how specialized the RSV4 truly was. It wasn't meant to flood highways, it was meant to set lap records. The early reception from enthusiasts validated the gamble, but also raised an unspoken question about how far a purpose-built machine could push its identity before the market pushed back. That tension between uncompromising performance and real-world ownership realities shaped every future update and raised expectations that something so sharp would have to keep evolving or risk being overshadowed by larger competitors. As development moved beyond its launch window, it became clear that the RSV4 wouldn't just participate in a class, It would attempt to redefine what a production superbike could be from the inside out. The question wasn't whether this machine could win races, it was whether the approach behind it could hold ground once rivals noticed and adapted. That brewing confrontation is where the next chapter takes shape, because performance alone doesn't guarantee survival when the rest of the world starts catching up. The Aprilia RSV4 entered its next phase with momentum but not immunity. Once it proved its speed and balance on the track, other manufacturers took notice and began reverse engineering the formula in their own ways. The Aprilia RSV4 had forced the industry to reckon with the idea that electronics, engine layout, and chassis integration could be dialed to racing precision straight from the showroom, and that raised the stakes for every rival with a presence in professional competition. Engineers refined the V4 power plant with incremental boosts in power, smoother throttle mapping, and revised cooling systems to handle track abuse in hotter climates like much of the US, where long sessions could expose thermal weaknesses. Update after update, the electronics suite grew more advanced. Quick shifters, launch control, wheelie mitigation, and cornering ABS became part of a layered toolset that serious riders could tailor to their style, rather than simply toggle on or off. In racing, the RSV4 delivered podiums that justified its cost and complexity, giving its manufacturer leverage to negotiate rules, shape development programs, and draw elite riders into its orbit. In showrooms, the success translated into credibility, even if volumes remained modest. Track-focused riders in the States began viewing the RSV4 as a benchmark rather than an outlier. And while some balked at maintenance costs or dealer scarcity, others embraced the exclusivity as part of the ownership experience. On the aftermarket scene, tuners discovered the engine had headroom for upgrades without compromising reliability when maintained correctly, and suspension specialists often praised the stock setup as a strong baseline rather than a starting flaw. With success came scrutiny, and regulatory pressure on emissions and noise-forced recalibration across every iteration. Yet the bike managed to retain its core personality without neutering the engine's urgency or the chassis' sharp reactions. Enthusiasts debating the merits of inline-4 versus V4 configurations began citing the RSV4 as proof that compact, high-revving V engines could coexist with advanced electronics and maintain edge-of-seat excitement. Meanwhile, racing organizations adjusted homologation rules that indirectly favored machines conceived for competition rather than adapted to it, a move that aligned perfectly with the RSV4's origin story. Suddenly, what began as a niche track weapon started steering development trends across multiple segments, even influencing how mid-tier sport bikes adopted trickle-down technology. In the US market, parts availability and service remained a challenge in certain regions, but the rising popularity of track days created pockets of dedicated RSV4 owners who shared tips, parts sources, and tuning advice like a tight-knit guild. The machine's distinct intake howl, compact cockpit, and aggressive stance became calling cards at circuits from California to Florida, reinforcing the identity it established overseas. Competition adapted, evolving electronics and chassis tuning to chase shrinking lap time gaps, but the RSV4's balance package often served as the comparison point rather than the outsider benchmark. Over time, its presence shaped buyer expectations to the point where a superbike without track-derived electronics or geometry seemed outdated, even if it offered similar power. As manufacturers recognized the shifting landscape, they retooled their designs to emulate features the RSV4 normalized, erasing some of the novelty but cementing its influence. What this created wasn't a quiet legacy, but a ripple effect that defined a decade of superbike progression and forced an ongoing technological arms race. The significance of that ripple, how it sustained, evolved, and affected both the bike itself and every rider who touched one, leads directly to how its long-term impact should be measured. The Aprilia RSV4 reached a point in its evolution where its identity was no longer just tied to championships or engineering milestones. Its lasting influence came from how it reshaped expectations across the entire performance segment. The Aprilia RSV4 proved that a production motorcycle could carry race-bred geometry, hypersensitive electronics, and a compact V4 layout without feeling like a compromised prototype. And that idea stuck with both enthusiasts and engineers. Riders who experienced the platform firsthand often described the sensation as riding something that demanded respect rather than affection. Yet the payoff in feedback and corner speed turned that demanding nature into a badge of honor. As updates rolled through successive years, aerodynamic winglets, refined electronics management, and incremental power increases kept the bike in contention with newer releases while preserving the qualities that defined the first version. Its success story didn't rest solely on trophies. It lived in the track day garages where owners treated maintenance like preparation for a time trial rather than a chore. The RSV4 carved a lane for high-performance machines that didn't soften their edges to chase broad sales, proving that a low-volume, high-focus strategy could still yield long-term relevance. That relevance also meant grappling with modern realities like emissions restrictions, insurance costs, and a shifting market where some riders favor upright ergonomics and tech-heavy versatility over race posture and high-rev focus. Yet each time the platform risked dilution, refinements managed to protect its core personality: sharp steering, immediate throttle response, and chassis behavior that rewards precision over casual input. Legacy in this context isn't nostalgia. It's the platform continuing to serve as a litmus test for what a serious superbike should feel like when pushed to its limit. Owners and reviewers still compare modern rivals to the RSV4 when evaluating stability at lean electronics transparency and how well a bike communicates grip levels through the bars and seat. While rivals close the gap with their own V4s, hybrid engine strategies, and evolving electronics, the RSV4's consistency across generations helped it maintain relevance even as technology shifted underneath it. Its influence stretches into how riders talk about performance, how they budget for track support, and how manufacturers justify building bikes that cater more to lap times than commuting comfort. The core question the RSV4 answered, whether purity of purpose could survive market and regulatory pressure, remains the key to understanding why its presence endures. As the platform ages into future updates, its impact will be measured less by how many units it sold, and more by how many decisions in the sport bike world trace back to its uncompromising blueprint. The Aprilia RSV4 occupies a rare space in the US market because it appeals to riders who view ownership as a commitment rather than a casual purchase, and that shapes how it's considered today by both buyers and enthusiasts. The Aprilia RSV4 demands more attention to maintenance than a more mass-produced superbike, and parts availability can vary depending on region. But owners who stay ahead of service intervals often report reliability that matches or exceeds expectations for something tuned so aggressively. Pricing on the new market tends to sit near other European superbikes, with used examples offering strong value as long as buyers verify service history, track use, and recalls handled through authorized channels. Import rules for older models aren't typically necessary. Since the US received the RSV4 early in its run, but limited dealer coverage means pre-purchase inspections and sourcing specialty components can require more planning than with mainstream brands. For enthusiasts considering long-term ownership, the primary costs fall in tires, fluids, and track prep, rather than constant mechanical failure, provided maintenance isn't skipped or piecemealed. Insurance quotes vary dramatically based on age, location, and riding record, but declaring track-only use or limiting mileage can reduce the burden for committed riders. Track day availability across the country has grown, and many circuits now see RSV4s regularly, often modified with exhaust swaps, aerodynamics kits, upgraded brake components, or custom ECU mapping tailored to high-octane fuel and aggressive riding styles. Riders who value electronics tuning and precision chassis feel see the RSV4 as a baseline, not a compromise, and its impact on the segment means its technology remains competitive even when new models debut with fresh headline numbers. For anyone watching the market, used prices have remained stable enough to suggest the bike holds appeal beyond novelty, and certain early editions have gained collector interest thanks to limited import numbers and their connection to championship seasons. Reliability discussions rarely focus on catastrophic failure as long as the engine isn't over-revved on missed downshifts or starved of oil due to neglect. Most issues trace back to owners, treating it like a commuter rather than a track-bred machine. What lingers after all the technical talk and historical context is the fact that the RSV4 didn't just compete, it convinced an entire segment that a focused, uncompromising superbike could shape the future rather than chase it. Its legacy is built on feedback, ferocity, and an unwillingness to dilute what made it distinct, and that makes its story as relevant now as when it first roared into competition. The final takeaway is simple. Performance with purpose doesn't fade when it rewrites expectations. It forces the rest of the field to keep up.